What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Everything Everywhere All at Once is No Perfect Movie. And it centers on a middle aged woman named Evelyn, played by Michelle Yeoh, who feels as if her life has been unfulfilled. Her laundromat business is not successful, neither are these side hobbies that she's trying to pursue as other careers. Her relationship with her husband and daughter are extremely poor, to put it mildly. But one day she's approached by an alternate version of her husband Wayman, played by Huy Quan, who informs her that there are multiple different parallel universes, and in order to stop an alternate version of her daughter, played by Stephanie Hsu, she must learn to do what is called verse jumping, possessing the bodies of her alternate lifelines and access their abilities of martial arts, acrobatics, among many other bizarre skills in order to defeat her daughter, save the world, and also unlock her fullest potential as a person. And I think it goes without saying, I, like most major hardcore film nerds, was extremely looking forward to checking out this movie. The fact that it's Michelle Yeoh traveling through parallel universes, using her skills as a martial arts legend in this sci-fi action comedy coming from A24, and the Daniels, who gave us Swiss Army Man. And no, I haven't seen Swiss Army Man just because I'm not sure I can handle the premise. But the fact that the premise exists and has a huge reputation from the people who love it got me so excited that, like with most movies, I closed my eyes during the trailer so that I would be as blown away as possible, wouldn't get any false expectations. But the interesting thing is, even though when I first saw the movie, I did think it was good, I still felt underwhelmed by it. And I knew that I had to wait a week, go see it again before I reviewed it, just so I can catch any potential crucial details that might make me appreciate this film a lot more. Because with everything the Daniels are throwing at you in the foreground and background, I knew going in that upon rewatch there would be a lot of moments where I just sat there and went, I get it. And there were definitely plenty of moments to be had, and I can certainly say I appreciated it more, but there was still a little bit of me that felt there was still something to be desired. But as with all these reviews, I'm going to start with the positives first. It goes without saying that Michelle Yeoh gives a good performance. I wouldn't necessarily call it one of her best performances because, to her credit, she's actually cast against type here and playing a character that's out of the ordinary for her. She's usually known for playing wise spiritual mentors, strict authority figures, or this equal blend of both. And when you watch movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Crazy Rich Asians, Tomorrow Never Dies, or even Kung Fu Panda 2, you can absolutely understand why. She has equal amounts of physical strength and grace in order to back up these performances and make them feel so natural but different at the exact same time. Evelyn in this movie is a considerably more flawed character who makes a lot of selfish, impulsive decisions without any real hint of remorse for her consequences. And when she finds out that she has a much larger responsibility of having to save the entire universe from her own daughter of all people, you can feel the sense of how unprepared she is and the fact that she has to be taught every single detail as it happens with no hint of preparation whatsoever. And naturally, it leads her to make a lot of dumb decisions, both comedically and dramatically. But the most fascinating thing about her emotional arc in this movie is the more time she spends in these alternate lifelines and she discovers what could have happened if her life had turned out a lot different from what she had, that on the surface look a hell of a lot more glamorous. There are other moments where she's a kung fu superstar similar to Michelle Yeoh, and she just sits there and goes, my husband has to see just what would have happened if I hadn't met him, if I hadn't married him. And wow, I never thought I would say this about Michelle Yeoh, but what a bitch. And the movie expects you to say, what a bitch. It isn't until she spends more time in these timelines that she slowly but surely has to face this bittersweet moment where no matter what would have happened, no matter how different other things would have been, there still would have been this sense of unfulfillment and remorse over what could have been. And she realizes that everyone else in her life, regardless of what would have happened had she met them or not, they would have turned out the exact same in terms of their personalities, in terms of their positive and weak elements as human beings. I love the message that comes with this movie saying that no matter how hard you try to prevent suffering in life, it is inevitable. And the most you can do is accept that there's going to be pain, but embrace the people you have in order to face up to that. there are so many movies that have come out lately, like Batman or The Cursed or Death on the Nile, that fit this message perfectly. And it comes out at just the right time where we are slowly but surely starting to come out of this circumstance that is our decade, and not slowly enough because it pisses me off so much that we're afraid of germs more than literally everything else in life. But I've gone on and on about that before. Now, granted, it takes a while for her to really be the star of the show because everyone else around her have all these memorable quirks, and she's kind of sort of the normal one of the bunch, but she does hold her own ground compared to everyone else. She kicks a lot of ass when she needs to, and her reactions to these batshit insane environments that she's instantly thrust into without any knowledge of what they're like are as natural as possible. Stephanie Hsu as the villain hits the perfect amount of over the top energy in terms of her line delivery and her facial expressions. I love that she's the character who utilizes the multiverse's power to her fullest potential and uses it kind of like a toy. One major highlight in the movie was her introduction to Evelyn, where she kills people in this cartoonish but also dark and twisted fashion. And the arc slash conflict that she's given with Evelyn, without getting into specific spoilers as to why the two of them are at odds, actually made for some of the most heartwarming moments towards the end of the film, where in between the fighting, the two of them get time to explain their motivations and backstories towards each other, revealing that no matter how old you grow as a mother or a daughter, there are still certain qualities about each other that you haven't really gotten to learn about. And whether they like to admit it or not, they're more similar in terms of their flaws than they like to let on. And I never thought I would say this, but for me, the standout performance has got to be Huy Quan as Waymond. I never thought I would say the best part of a movie was Short Round, seeing as how, I gotta be honest, I hated him in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and I kind of liked him in The Goonies, but I felt that he was the most underutilized of the Goonies. And I don't like that his acting style as a kid involved a lot of constant screaming and exaggerated beyond belief facial expressions just to sell a joke. And once in a while, he still does that, and it can get a little annoying. But Kwan still proves himself to be the most versatile performer in having to balance out the real life Wayman, who is this lovable doofus that turns out to be a lot more wise than he lets on, to the alternate version of Wayman who has to explain to Evelyn what's going on, protect her at all costs, and teach her how to fend for herself at the exact same time. This Jackie Chan style action hero of Wayman that has the best fight scene in the entire movie revolving around a fanny pack. And also this much more humbled and stoic version of Wayman, who has probably my favorite speech in the entire movie, where he talks about, it's really hard to describe. You know how there are some people in life that you think are too nice and you think are never standing up for themselves? He gives this incredible monologue about why there's a ton of intelligence and wisdom that comes with being too nice for your own good in the most dire of circumstances, and it's a philosophy that I want a hell of a lot more in other movies. And in regards to the visual style that comes with Everything Everywhere All at Once, which was probably, like most people, the thing I was excited to check out the most, seeing as how you're traveling through other parallel dimensions, and this is coming from two directors who made a movie about a farting corpse that can do just about anything. The one cinematic technique that I noticed the most is that in order to establish to the audience that they're in an alternate timeline without being too on the nose or overbearing, the aspect ratio will switch from the standard widescreen to anthropomorphic and sometimes even to 1:1 Academy ratio in a much more subtle way than I thought that we were going to get. They don't slowly fade in the aspect ratio to let you know that shit is about to go down. They do that once in a while, but sometimes they'll just cut to an alternate timeline where the ratio will subtly cue audience members in that what they're watching is completely separate from the scene they were witnessing beforehand. There aren't as many action sequences as I thought there were going to be, but when there are, the action is for the most part incredibly well helmed, where they film the fight choreography in massive wide shots that emphasize the fact that Michelle Yeoh, Stephanie Hsu, and Huy Quan are the ones actually doing their own stunts. Even Jamie Lee Curtis tries to do her own stunts. And I will say this, Jamie Lee Curtis was a lot better than I thought she was going to be. They give her a lot more depth than is expected for an IRS inspector, but she does kind of tie into the one problem I had with the fight sequences. Sometimes the editing can be a little too jumpy, and one thing that I hate about alternate dimension movies is that they feel as if it's necessary to constantly jump cut in between other dimensions as Evelyn's mind becomes a hell of a lot more fragmented. And in Jamie Lee Curtis's case in particular, whenever they speed up or slow down the footage, sometimes it feels as if it's to sell the fact that an actor who's not capable of doing the choreography is doing their own stunts, and I just didn't buy it whatsoever. I'm not saying Jamie Lee Curtis is too old to do the stunts. I mean, look at how old Yeoh and Kwan are. It's just, they're much more in shape and they've had more time to train compared to her. So, as much as I give him credit for trying to sell her as being a threat, I just never bought into it. And the quick cut editing is a little too jarring whenever they cut upon impact of a punch. I didn't think it was necessary, but at the same time, when they do speed up or slow down the footage in between fights, and you cut to Wayman, real life Wayman's reactions as he's just going, "What the fuck is going on?" Like, those moments actually make it all the more hilarious, particularly a fight scene involving a dog on a leash and a trophy. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those moments had some of the most insanely hilarious visuals. My crowd just ate those sequences up every time I went to see the movie. So, with all those positives in mind, how come I still felt underwhelmed by this movie? For me, I think the biggest complaint that I have is that there is way too much exposition and there is way too much time focused on explaining every single character's backstory, motivation, or the lessons that they've learned through dialogue, as opposed to just watching these characters live their life. I know they do technically build up Evelyn and her family as characters beforehand and then introduce the multiverse, but it still felt incredibly streamlined, and the ways that they set up the family dynamics are mostly through family arguments that feel like expository monologues as opposed to family arguments where they're coming up with their words completely off the cuff. And the Daniels try to compensate for the amount of info dumps, especially with alternate Wayman, because he is the big exposition vessel of the film, kind of like how Joseph Gordon-Levitt was in Inception. With him especially, they try to compensate for the amount of info dumps there are by having visuals of each scenario being narrated about accompany the dialogue. And in order to address the character development, they try to give every character a simple but likable motivation for us to latch onto them very quickly. And sometimes that does work, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really help that these characters are so simplistic in their motivations that it kind of comes across as one note. And something that really bugged me was that some of these characters, their entire personality and character arcs are defined by their race, their gender, or their sexuality, as opposed to their actual character flaws. Like, James Hong is the stereotypical patriarch, and Stephanie Hsu is your standard lesbian child who is looking for acceptance from her family. And I'm not saying those are bad things to address in movies and TV. What I'm saying is, I've seen these arcs done in the exact same way in movies that didn't have a parallel universe, but they were ironically a lot smarter in the way they address these themes because they actually had time to witness these characters live their lives in a much more natural fashion. They weren't constantly on the run to the point where there's no time for them to breathe. There's no time for them to say, "I feel this," or "I understand this." It's a lot of exchanging information back and forth from each other, and that's really all there is to it. And not only do I find the whole thing where characters are defined by their race, gender, and sexuality incredibly insulting because movies like this have existed since long before I was born, as I mentioned in my Hyperion's review, so even though I'm just gonna flat out say it, it's not new ground anymore, it also doesn't tie into the message where it points out that bad people are not born evil. They're born because of the pain and suffering that they've experienced in their lives, and that can change by showing kindness onto others. So it doesn't even really matter all this much. And on top of that, you don't even get to really learn why these characters have unfulfilled goals in their lives. You don't know where they got their passion for these side careers or hobbies, what drove their passion, why they failed in the first place. Hell, with Evelyn, you don't even really know for a second what her side gigs and hobbies were until you experience her other lifetimes and you realize that these hobbies are her careers in those timelines. And that part was definitely cool, but it would have been cooler if she actually spent that much time the other in the other parallel universes, because that's the weird thing. I didn't feel like we got to spend that much time in those universes compared to what we saw in the trailers after having seen it twice. All of these parallel dimensions look and act the exact same as the real world, with only one or two major differences, and sometimes that was enough, particularly one involving around fingers and toes. And again, if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes that was enough, but they don't really drive the story forward. They just serve as comic relief. And if it was funny, I'd be okay with that, but most of the comedy stems from Evelyn trying to explain the situation to her family members, and of course they don't believe her, or alternate Wayman explaining to her in the first place, but she doesn't believe him. And I don't like that style of comedy where it's a fish out of water scenario. Nobody believes him until the shit really hits the fan. And I know it's technically more authentic for that to exist in the real world, where you say, hey, we're being controlled like puppets, kind of like Ratatouille. Like, yeah, it would be ridiculous. People would say, you're crazy, maybe you should lie down, maybe we should call somebody. Yeah, it's more authentic, but it's not more entertaining. If anything, it's less entertaining. It's all just a huge mess. And if you were to tell me that years from now they would probably adapt this movie into a miniseries, I'd probably be in the minority for saying that would probably be a better idea, because I felt like more could have been explored with the characters. More could have been explored with these parallel universes. But I'm still happy to say that I got my money's worth both times I saw Everything Everywhere All at Once. Michelle Yeoh, Huy Quan, Stephanie Hsu all have a great family dynamic. The action sequences, for the most part, were a lot of fun and had a huge smile on my face. And in the grand scheme of things, as a studio film, it feels incredibly indie. It feels different. And I'm glad that we have more movies like that. So, despite all the grievances I have with the film, overall, I'm going to give Everything Everywhere All at Once a 3.5 out of 5, so long as I can get the title right, because it is a mouthful. If you haven't seen it yet, I would highly recommend checking it out first. But after you see it the first time, give it a little bit of breathing room. Just think about everything you witnessed, and if you feel like you have to go see it again in order to get a concrete opinion, do that. It was totally worth it. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen Everything Everywhere All at Once, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.